Hello everyone and welcome to the fourth in our five-part national webinar series addressing the core issues and opportunities of Canada's EV charging infrastructure. I'm Nino De Cara, founder of Electric Autonomy, and I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge that our work is conducted from the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. With this national discussion series, we're bringing together speakers from across the country to share their knowledge and best practices, and also to problem solve some of the significant challenges ahead. I'm delighted to introduce the fourth episode in this series, how we support the rollout of medium and heavy duty fleets. And this episode is sponsored by ABB. We're grateful to ABB for their support of this discussion. With vehicle fleets of all sizes across the country looking at adopting thousands of zero-emission vehicles in the coming years, there are many steps that need to be taken now to ensure these vehicles have access to the refueling technologies that they need. And there are obviously many opportunities with initiatives like the clean fuel regulations and the carbon credit market that can really help make the case for fleet electrification and the investments required in charging infrastructure. And we have a terrific panel for you today who will be taking you through this discussion, and I'm delighted to introduce you to them now, and if I can invite the panelists to turn on their cameras and join us. They are Gabriella Faveron, Director of EV Infrastructure at 7Gen. Owen Sheridan, Senior Energy Advisor at the Government of Yukon. Simon Tessier, Sales Manager, Eastern Canada at ABB. Tim Reeser, Chief Executive Officer at Lightning eMotors. And my colleague, Emma Jarrett, Executive Editor of Electric Autonomy, who will be moderating today's discussion. We've already had several questions submitted by the audience during the registration process, but we would still love to hear your questions live in the Q&A. So please use the Q&A box in the bottom right of your screen, and Emma and the panel will get to as many of them as possible. If you'd like to make a general comment, please use the chat function. So questions only in the Q&A button, and general comments to the panel and other audience attendees in the chat box. And finally, if you prefer the French language, you can see a simultaneous translation of this webinar by clicking on the three dots in the bottom right corner of your Zoom window and enable captions. You'll be able to see captions in French and many other languages. So with that, welcome panelists, and over to you, Emma, to get things started.
Welcome, everyone. Nice to have you all here. We were getting to chat just a bit before we hopped on, and we've got the real spectrum of Canada covered. So it's very exciting to get such a variety of experiences. And sorry, Tim, a nod to you. You are in the US, so North America. All right, so Simon, could you start us off, please, from the charging provider perspective? How far off or close are we to being able to roll out medium and heavy duty fleet charging at depots and publicly as part of a robust charging network?
So I think when you look at this, it all depends on also the types of vehicle, the types of route you want to electrify. When you're electrifying, you need it's more complex than what we're used to. We didn't have to ask any questions on how am I going to refuel my vehicles at the time. Now we have to do, before electrifying, need to look at the route that you're going to electrify and how we're going to do this to establish the power of your charger and all of that. Now, what we're seeing with this today, with the projects that we have, is that it is feasible with the correct routes and the correct technology, but I think the technology is there. Now there's even more advances that are coming. We're working on what we call the megawatt charging solution for heavy duty fleets to enable really a very, very fast charging, where this could enable like long route travels and stuff like that. But we have existing customers in Canada where they actually already electrified some of their routes locally by having electric trucks and all of that. So I'd have to say that the technology for me is there. And what's also a big change is also for us as a company in ABB, the service also aspect of things is also there. We have a robust service team in Canada throughout the different provinces to be able to support this. And I think it's one of the key elements there to be able to have this. It's one thing to have the technology, but you need to make sure that you've got a good service partner and someone that's there whenever there's an issue there to help you.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I mean, it's an excellent point about the aftercare of chargers. That's something that I think is coming up pretty ubiquitously throughout the industry, is that whether you're doing medium, heavy duty charging or regular light duty passenger vehicles, chargers need that ongoing maintenance, and what will that look like? So Gabriella, picking up on what Simon was saying about, trends on what's working, he mentioned that it's very route specific right now. There are just routes that are working to be electrified. What are you seeing from your perch at 7Gen in terms of other thematic successes around securing charging for medium and heavy duty vehicles?
Thank you for the question, Emma, and a really great point, Simon, around the technologies there. I think like the key point I want to make here is really fleets that start electrifying earlier, they are having better success than the ones that don't, or that they are not understanding the full complexity of fleet electrification. So 7Gen basically is trying to catalyze this procedure of the adoption, by really facilitating the process throughout, providing turnkey solutions for our customers. So what we see is that often customers from 7Gen perspective comes to us with they started off their electrification, they started picking the charger, but they're still unsure about the full aspects of the VSC equipment that they have to actually install in the infrastructure, how they're going to deal with utilities, how they're going to deal with power constraints. So there are lots of layers that they have to consider earlier in their process when they're only purchasing the vehicle. So I think that is essentially the trends we're seeing with a few customers we're having, that they started off they have their experience, and and then they come to us, and we are planning not only for today, but also for the full roadmap, for the full fleet roadmap, including operations, including their infrastructure, not only for now, so they can optimize their cost efficiencies now, but also for the future. And I think that is a point that in terms of the context, how we're facilitating this process for them. So the sooner you started, the better.
Great. And we actually have an audience question that came in early addressing this exact issue, but their question is, actually, they can't even buy their fleet vehicles yet. Their 1,600 strong fleet is majority F-250s or F-550s, not available on the market yet, but what steps could they take now to prepare for future charging needs?
Yeah, there are already charging stations available. There are already technologies there. The utility, in terms of utility timelines and getting dedicated powers, if you start your charging journey now, it's much better. When actually the vehicle timelines will meet later. So you're going to be able to have like all the dedicated power needs like for your sites and receiving the vehicles. What we see very often is that people and fleet managers gets very excited about the vehicle. We understand about the constraints in the industry of acquiring, securing vehicles as well in terms of timelines. There are vehicles out there. From our experience, especially like on the light medium duty side, we were going to have a much more quicker turnaround than the long haul side with developing like vehicles and everything. But the sooner you start your charging infrastructure planning, engineering, and design, it's much better for to fulfill your operations later on in a smoother way.
If you build it, they will charge mentality. So Owen, I have admittedly had a very keen eye on what Yukon is doing with respect to getting a medium heavy duty fleet piloted or established in the territory. So I'm really looking forward to hearing about your perspective on that experience. For the benefit of our audience, perhaps you could give a little bit of background. We also have a story on more fulsomely what Yukon was doing that maybe one of my colleagues can pop into the chat for everyone watching. And then we'll go through the challenges that the Yukon has had with medium heavy duty vehicles. Oh, sorry, you're still on mute. There you go.
So Yukon government has been working to encourage and support the uptake for medium and heavy duty vehicles for about the past 3 years, really. So we're nearing completion of phase 2 of our medium and heavy duty zero emission vehicle program. We've had very mixed results. I would say there's been a chasm between the lower class rated medium duty vehicles versus the higher class 7 or 8s. So for the heavier vehicles, the buyers are there, but the sellers are not. We've had there's a market there for class 7 and 8 trucks to serve the local Whitehorse area. And there are some very, very good use cases for electrification there. Unfortunately, it's been very challenging to get vehicles. We've been exploring leads with manufacturers, and some of them have gone quite far. At one point, we were, I think, 4 weeks away from delivery for a class 7 truck, but then the local dealer was not quite ready to provide service and support, so that fell through, and that's been a continuing trend with those higher class of vehicles. That there's businesses there that could benefit, could use some of our incentives to help purchase the vehicle, and then save quite a bit of operating cost. But the suppliers aren't quite there yet. When it comes to the more medium duty vehicles, so I'm thinking cargo vans and shuttle buses, we've had quite a bit of success there in phase 1 and phase 2 of our programs. So it looks like a good portion of that fleet will be replaced throughout the Yukon with electric vehicles over the coming years. Uptake has been very good. Experience so far by the users has been very good. We are monitoring cold weather performance, so maybe we're one of the best places to monitor that. Last winter we only had a few vehicles on the road. They performed very well, but this year we have a lot more vehicles on the road and data loggers installed. So we will have a report out in April that will be able to identify how much actual range loss we had and things like that, and also the general user experience of driving these vehicles over winter. So yeah, it looks like our supports are now going to split. So instead of having the same type of supports for the class 2Bs as the class 8s, we're gonna split that somehow, and that's being worked out at the moment. But probably for the lower class, the supports will be something closer to the rebates for light duty vehicles, as in there'll be set rebate levels for certain vehicles. Whereas for the heavier vehicles, we'll probably retain a call for proposals type approach and take each one as it comes, evaluate its merits. So when we started this whole initiative, we were offering up to 80% of costs. In that phase 1, we had very limited uptake. We had, as I mentioned a while ago, we had a number of projects fall through. at the later stages. Phase 2, we'd offered up to 75%, but we had such huge interest, we ended up supporting them at between 30 and 40%. So going forward, that will drop. People are probably most interested in charging on this panel. So as yet, charging is not a bottleneck to uptake in the Yukon, but we expect that to change as supply of the heavier duty vehicles improves, and also as the uptake of the lighter duty vehicles grows. So what we've seen so far is businesses are purchasing a single vehicle, and a lot of them are small businesses. They might only be operating 1, 2, 3 vehicles. But as this grows, we do expect some of the larger businesses with fleets of, and when I say large, I mean large in a Yukon context. So 5 to 10 vehicles would be a large fleet here. Then charging and organizing good charging infrastructure becomes a bit more important. And then obviously for the heavier duty vehicles. The challenges we have with charging infrastructure is probably similar to what you have in most places, in terms of long lead times on transformers and utility reluctance really to support extensive charging networks.
So just going back to Gabriella's point, talking about the future planning, and even if the vehicles aren't here yet, the time is now to start lining up that charging piece. Is that the approach that businesses or fleets are taking in Yukon, or even from the government's perspective?
That's a perspective that we're encouraging, but it's not really getting much traction. And it's difficult to make a case to a business that has no EVs on the road that they should be installing charging now, while we have high levels of supports for charging infrastructure, and while you can plan ahead. It makes sense, but I can't really see us getting much traction on that until we start to get more vehicles on the road.
Right, thank you. So Tim, when you hear something like that, like it's hard to make the business case for medium heavy duty fleet charging, particularly when the vehicles aren't here yet. What does that tweak for you in terms of your experience with Lightning getting fleet charging up and running in Canada to support the vehicles?
Yeah, so today, Emma, we have over 150 vehicles, where we've got over 100 vehicles on the road in Canada today, another 50 medium-duty electric vehicles coming over the next several months. So we've got a decent installed base of electric vehicles. Most of the medium-duty vehicles that we have up there can and are capable of charging on level 2 because of the duty cycle. So when you think about a school bus, for example, or even a delivery bus, so the average school bus in Canada, I think last I saw, runs about 38 miles in the morning and 38 miles in the afternoon. So when you think about what that needs to charge, a level 2 charger is more than sufficient given its dwell time at night. And in fact, even when you look at a delivery van also, typical delivery van daily routes about 60 miles a day. So again, that van can easily charge over level 2, even if it's running 2 shifts over Christmas time, you still have enough dwell time to charge over level 2. So in the case of level 2 charging, it is relatively simple. Most of the customers do it at the depot. Level 2 again is a 220 outlet. It's a stove outlet or a welding outlet so it's not difficult to put in level 2. We don't have a lot of upstream requirements for the utilities. It's not very expensive. So from that perspective, I think it is, many people lump all of this together and make the mistake of lumping it together. And so you think about heavy duty, a semi truck that has to go over the road. Yes, that needs a megawatt charger. And so I get it. That's difficult. That, as ABB said, that's coming. It's there from a technology standpoint, but installation time, utility time, et cetera, is a barrier, and it's tough. But I think it's important not to lump every vehicle into that same obstacle, in the sense that when you look at school buses, shuttle buses, delivery vans, delivery trucks, they don't have that obstacle. They don't need megawatt chargers. Many of them only need a 10 kilowatt charger. So from our standpoint, the vehicles we're shipping today are successfully charging in Canada without issues. And certainly the more the more infrastructure that happens, the better it is for everyone. But when you look at these cases, which there's a lot of, where you've got an opportunity to level 2 charge these vehicles overnight, or sometime during the day, and maybe you need an opportunity charge. All of our vehicles do come with DC fast charge ability. So if you want to charge it on a public place somewhere where you need a fast opportunity charge at lunchtime, you can certainly get that done, and it works. But the frank truth is, most of our customers are successfully managing their fleet with level 2 chargers at nighttime charging.
You know, that's a really that's a really important point, and I'm definitely onboarding that between you and Owen's comment that obviously medium heavy duty vehicles, they're sort of one acronym, MHDV, at all times, but they really are two distinct things, and their charging, vastly different charging needs, bears that out. So Simon, as Tim just mentioned about the megawatt charging, you know, would like to pick up that thread, because we know that this is being done successfully in some places in the world, not necessarily Canada yet, but overseas for sure. You know, news has been coming out about ABB and other charging operator success stories. So could you flick at those, please, and then see if there are any lessons being learned that could be brought back to Canada to establish a network here of megawatt chargers?
Yeah, I mean, for sure. Right now, like in terms of the megawatt charging, it's something that's in development, that we're working with the industry, with different OEMs in there to develop this as a new standard. It's also something that in charging, I think that still needs also more standardization on that side, whether it's the plug. I mean, we see it now in North America for the light duty vehicles, for example. We're seeing manufacturers switching to the Tesla plug, and then other CCS plug, and then all this. I think if we can all come to an agreement, standardized stuff, it's going to make things a lot easier for everyone on that side. And MCS is working on having a standard for this. But in terms of lessons learned, we're seeing we have multiple projects where it helps a lot also for interoperability with different vehicles. Sometimes being able to have that done in the US or Europe, then we have this confidence when we're deploying chargers here that with certain vehicles where you know we've integrated and that we're able to work well. And in Canada, there's actually a lot of traction going on. I mean, for school bus, in Montreal, we've got a customer that has over 300 DC fast chargers in Montreal for their school bus fleet, where their fleet is almost solely electric. I think for Quebec, you can't buy any more gas buses. So they have this where there's a lot of electric buses, and there's a lot of lessons learned from the bus world. We're seeing transit authorities also moving a lot where with electric buses that are lessons where charging depots where they have an electric bus or heavy duty truck, you could have lessons learned being applied to both of them. And we have, depending on the use case, like I was saying with routes, we see trucks being charged with a 20 kilowatt DC fast charger level 2 chargers, and in other routes we can see trucks that need a 350 kilowatt charger on the road and that they're using. It really depends on the application that you're doing. Like Tim was saying, for example, in the school bus fleet, rarely you need a very fast charger because your school bus is leaving in the morning and leaving the end of the afternoon, so you have a lot of time to charge that vehicle. So there's ideally what you want the charging infrastructure is you want to use the least power possible. You don't want to have too high of a peak, and you want to make sure by looking at how much charging time, your battery size, and your route, and trying to find that right amount of power, because you don't want to use too much kilowatts for no reasons. And that's where in the transit world we're seeing where we have a lot of buses starting to see softwares like charging management software that we're managing the peak and the loads over there, and trying to find that solution that we're seeing more and more. And those are lessons learned that we'll be able to apply when we'll see fleets electrify a lot more. Like panelists were saying, we're seeing a lot of fleet products right now where it's more like you buy one vehicle or two vehicle and more like pilot projects. Other than like in school bus, we see this heavily invested in heavy duty fleets. I think right now it's still in the pilot phase. It's where similar to a couple of years ago where transit was, where we're seeing projects with 5 chargers, 4 or 5 vehicles, and then coming there. But it's slowly going to come there, and we're gonna have a lot of lessons learned coming from this.
So Simon, just you mentioned a standardized plug would be helpful when getting this kind of charging infrastructure up and going. We've had a couple audience questions rolling in about what about not necessarily a plug, but if a transit bus is using overhead charging at its depot, could there be public overhead charging, or what about wireless charging capabilities?
Yeah, with the buses, there's what we call the pantograph that are being used. There's a new standard that came out. We actually had, and I think I saw a question over there about Edmonton. Edmonton, a couple of years ago, we used our chargers. It was the first project worldwide where we brought the pantograph indoors. Where when we initially thought like that's where there was a lot of lessons learned over there. Before pantograph, the standard was you only use Wi-Fi. By having those closed, you had interference. We learned we had RFID stuff. You can spare all the details, but there's been a lot of lessons learned there that now we're seeing this being applied more and more in the field. And it's something that I think that's also why the MCS is being seen. The pantograph at the time was used to enable fast charging, because you can go up to 450 kilowatt of charging, whereas it's a lot faster than the typical chargers. And it helps you if you have buses. We have transits in Brampton, for example, running those pantographs daily, and the bus just does a route and comes to charge for 5 minutes, goes back and does that route. So again, it comes to how much time do you have to charge and what type of route do you want to do. But it is something I think that could be possible. I haven't seen, from talking with manufacturers, I haven't seen any movement there to get, let's say, pantograph rails on heavy duty vehicles, where I think it's more going to be towards an MCS type solution, having a plug with the MCS that's going to enable charging at the same type of power than you'd have with a pantograph.
Thanks so much. So Owen, based on what fleets in the Yukon have gone through, and also I think it's so interesting that you had targeted 75% cost, up to 75% cost coverage, but because there was so much interest, only we're able to cover between 30 and 40%. So with managing the costs of all these projects, what could be done on the funding side for communities in more rural jurisdictions in Canada to be able to account for those extra added on pieces that, maybe it's not just the charger you're paying for, maybe you're paying for new transformers as well, or new transmission lines. What could be done better for that funding piece?
Yeah, so there's a couple of parts to that. So funding for vehicles themselves, I think for the challenges we see, there's only so much the funding can achieve, and it is adequate, or has been adequate over the past few years for vehicle purchases. So sustaining those opportunities would be enough. So we have the federal program, and then we have our territorial program, which we're hoping to extend. When it comes to the cost of charging infrastructure, this is a bit more challenging. So we do have methods of supporting level 2 chargers for businesses, for First Nations, for municipalities throughout the territory. And the supports from the territorial government are probably adequate at the moment. We're not seeing as much interest in that as we had hoped. We were hoping that because of the high levels of support we have at the moment, to encourage the types of prep that we mentioned earlier on, as in investing now to be ready for the future. We're not seeing a lot of that, some but not much. But when it comes to DC fast chargers, territorial government has no supports for those. There is support available from the federal government, but we haven't seen any successful applications to that from any entities within the Yukon. So making that easier to access might be somewhat beneficial. But as I mentioned earlier on, there's only so much the funding can achieve. At the moment, that's not a bottleneck. What we really need to do is to see the suppliers step up, and then the question will be, when will that happen, and how long will it take for those commitments to extend to small and remote markets like the Yukon? And when that happens, then I think charging will become the bottleneck. It would be nice if we could get ahead of that curve, but for the moment, I think the focus on getting what's available now and making sure we have adequate charging infrastructure for that is our focus.
Thanks. So Tim, I think Owen's questions about when and how long it will take, and getting to supply to rural communities was one that you're maybe well positioned to answer. How big of a focus is that for OEMs, and are there any other process improvements, just building on what Owen was saying, that you can see that you'd like to have done?
Obviously, all of us, I think every OEM would like to have as big a market as we can have. So if that means reaching the rural, it's important. But I also think on a pragmatic basis, it's important for everybody to think about starting at the low-hanging fruit, because everybody needs to find a way. Virtually nobody in the EV OEM space has been profitable, and that's primarily been because none of us have enough volume. And we kind of hear from the panel today, there's a bit of chicken and egg. The customers want it, the OEMs don't have it, or in other cases, the OEMs have it and the customers may not be ready for it. So we have to get past that. And so we are starting to see more volume. And the advantage of more volume is multifold. Number one, as we do exactly the point earlier, is we see customers. We have one customer in Canada who's purchased 125 vehicles. And as you see that kind of purchase, our ability to get the costs down as we make a lot more vehicles at a time in terms of our manufacturing capacity and overhead and the absorption of that overhead, as well as the support and services that have to be out there. So for every vehicle we sell, we've got to make sure we have support and spare part infrastructure for that. And so you can imagine if every OEM is selling one vehicle to every rural community in North America, none of us will ever make money. And very frankly, you can go to the extreme and say electric vehicles won't even survive because it will be such a losing proposition. So as much as all of us want to include the rural communities, we need to be doing batch sizes of 5s, 10s, 15s, 20s, not 1s and 2s, not only because of manufacturing scale, but also because of service and support scale. So as we look out at the rural communities, we are targeting those customers either nationwide or companies like the large carriers or the large schools that can purchase, even when they look at their rural communities, purchase enough vehicles in aggregate that we can all put the correct amount of infrastructure and support. And again, this is true whether you're talking about supporting chargers and the infrastructure around chargers like Simon talked about with ABB, or whether we're talking about supporting the vehicles. In both cases, we need to have sufficient personnel to provide very daily, timely support to these fleets, because fleets can't have down vehicles and still make a living. So we have to do better even than what has historically been done with gasoline vehicles. It means we have to put that infrastructure in place, and it means we all need to get to scale, whether we're talking about ABB getting more chargers in the ground, or whether we're talking about Lightning putting more vehicles on the ground. Both of us need scale. So we're all looking at both rural and major metropolitan areas in the same way. How do we get to the 5s, 10s, 15s? And I've told all the government organizations and granting organizations that the fastest way for us all to fail is to get one vehicle to every city in North America. every OEM will fail under that model. So we are very, very focused on it, but it doesn't mean we can't make rural work. It just means we have to be conscious with our customers about how do we scale.
I mean, Gabriela, maybe you can knit that together from a, speaking to how buying in volume and sort of, jurisdictions coming together to do mass buys could help that chicken and egg problem, and, just being financially viable. And we'll go from there.
Absolutely. I think one of the approaches we are taking internally as well is how, and I'll summarize, I think, and resonate a little bit what the others have demonstrated here, which is around standardized equipment as well on the charging infrastructure side. So especially for us, we were focusing a lot on the last mile piece. We understand the duty cycles. Most of these vehicles, they have ranges that go up to 400 kilometers. But they are running around 200 kilometers per day or less. So this really gives the range. I think Simon and the team were mentioning a level 2 would be enough, or a high level 25 kilowatt DC would be just enough for those situations. So I think understanding basically the product, the vehicles that the customers are thinking of purchasing now, for the pilot projects and their full rollout, and standardizing the equipment, having proper transformers, panels, breakers, everything encompassed in one will facilitate for us deployers how we actually bring this at scale and at lower costs. Like, and I think another aspect I want to bring also is around public charging. We don't deploy public charging necessarily, but I think it is an excellent ally from our side, to allow our last mile fleet customers really start and giving more confidence on their deployment. So establishing hubs and understanding how they can lower their operational costs, having access to more charging infrastructure will also facilitate this conversation, for fleet managers that are still a bit resistant to start electrifying today. So I think that is a cost, but also availability piece, that always goes together, and we have to consider when we're talking about charging infrastructure.
And I mean, the $1 million question that certainly I always hear is, okay, how do we meet our timelines? We have these targets. I think they're looming very large in everyone's mind, no matter where you are in the EV ecosystem. So in your opinion, what timeline should we be working to on charging and getting that piece established in order to meet the actual vehicle adoption targets?
Yeah, I think today we are looking at, the reality is that we're looking at charging infrastructure because of supply chain or utilities and cities permitting processes, a not streamlined way. We're looking at ranges that vary from 3 months to over a year, depending on the province and depending, if we're talking about the US and expansion as well, it can vary a lot. So really fixing how we are discussing with utilities and partnering with utilities and cities, to streamline this overflow will allow us to have a shorter lead times, something quicker, over the course of the months, we are able to allow for the charging infrastructure to be placed, that we will allow also to meet the vehicle and sales timelines. I think another component that will really be important for those timelines is around charger reliability as well, and uptime. We wouldn't, I think some of my colleagues here mentioned about operations having spare parts. This is really a key point, to bring not only the technical feasibility, but also on the reputation, the industry reputation in general, for the adoption of EV charging. And I think last point I just want to address here on one of the comments on the chat about the experiences on financing. So I think it costs us today we're trying to meet the charging timelines, but the biggest roadblock is also how we're addressing how we can start earlier if we don't have the upfront CapEx, right? So working with not only cities incentives, but also private institutions, we're doing with Ben City and other financial institutions that are giving line of credits, or at least a supporting clean tech financing. I think that is one of the key aspects that more institutions needs to be doing also to allow for us to develop more EV as a service and charging as a service as well as we roll out this. So I think that answers, or if you have any questions, let me know.
No, that's great. All right, well, we have, buckets of questions coming in. So if everyone's happy to give the audience a turn, I'm pleased to put the rest of my agenda to the side. So I guess we will start with, let's pick up a recent point that we were just kind of diving into, because one of our viewers really wants to get into this. The question is, and I think Simon, you might be the best person for this. What about catenary systems in general? They're piloting in Germany and California. Quebec just published as a study on different tech and overhead catenary charging systems that seem to have a lot of potential.
Yeah, I think that the catenaries is something very interesting on that side. In Europe, they have kind of something, the way that they do pantograph is a bit similar, because you'd have to think of it like that. In North America, we call it pantograph down. So it's the charger that has an arm that goes down the bus. Whereas in Europe, they've got the pantograph up, where this could enable more of a catenary type solution where you would have the arm that would go up to this catenary and then start charging on the road. Which, looking at it, Canada's not, our weather is not making it easy. When you think of it, if you have those lines with snow, with ice, and all of that, it's not an easy place. And it's the same thing with wireless solutions. I mean, I'm in Quebec, so I can tell you with the state of the roads right now, it wouldn't be easy to have a wireless charging solution in the routes with the potholes that are there, the salt, the efficiency also that you would actually use from the utility is not as efficient. Now, the catenary solution might be something different there. There might be a case to do. I don't think we haven't looked at it directly, but I would see something similar with like we're doing with the pantograph stuff like that. Would be a solution that would be similar to it. But for sure, there are some different technological challenges there.
Great, thanks. And just keeping you in the hot seat for a second, you know, you were alluding to road issues, for example, being a barrier. You know, just being explicit though, as it relates to wireless power transfer, do you see that being viable for public opportunity charging, or would that be a viable depot solution? Where do we fall on that?
I think in depot solution it could be an option for routes. Maybe it could also be a solution. I mean, for sure, it's something that's very interesting to be able to. That way, you don't have to stop. You can just be driving and doing that. There's going to be some challenges in terms of interoperability because we have it with chargers that you plug in manually. So when you have a vehicle like this, you add snow on there with winter and all of that, it can bring challenges, but pretty sure the technology will get there to do it. It's something that from a theoretical standpoint, when you look at it, I mean, I'd be like, if I'd have like an EV, I'd be extremely happy to have a wireless charging solution and just say, hey, I'm driving to Toronto, I can take an EV from Montreal and just drive all the way, not having to stop. And I think we just need there because it's something that's really new and we haven't seen a lot of projects in northern countries. I've heard of projects in Italy being done and countries where the weather is actually better to help it. In Canada, our current situation also makes it more of a challenge. I wouldn't say impossible, but more of a challenge to implement.
Thanks so much. I will release you now. Tim, there is a question about essentially how to assess your fleet to make an informed decision about what vehicles you can or should electrify. So could you speak to the telematics side of this and you know, how that data could help inform those decisions, and do you have any recommendations around how to go about doing that?
Yes. So without sounding overly self-serving, it's something we've been passionate about since we were doing, even before we were doing BEVs and we were doing hybrids, collecting the data around commercial vehicle, the kind of routes they run, the kind of payloads they have, the kind of weather they run in has been something we've been doing really for 10 years now. So we have over 10 terabytes of data that we've collected via telematics. We collect about 200 data points from every vehicle we have in the field about every 2 seconds. So significant amount of data we've collected. That data allows us to know, you know, what the range of a school bus will be if it's 0 degrees Celsius and has a full payload of students in the case of a school bus, or a half payload, or maybe it's full one way or not the other. And the same thing when you look at a delivery truck or a delivery van. So that data has allowed us to now create a pretty robust model. We're finding typically that our range estimates are within 1 or 2%. So a customer can say, here's my route. Usually they give you a time versus distance with the mapping, so we know what the elevation changes are as well. We can plug that into the route and with a high degree of accuracy tell a customer, you know, we need this much battery in order to do the range, or with a given vehicle, here's you're going to need to charge it this much every night, or you're going to need to charge it opportunistically along the route. We'll know all of that based on the models we have. So it's a great tool for us. It's a free tool for customers that we provide to customers in order to do this kind of analysis, but it no longer has to be guesswork. But it is important to do because those of you who follow, I drive electric cars personally as well. And so I follow a lot of the social media around it, and there remains, as people get more and more educated, a lot of question about what happens in bad weather, a lot of question about what happens in when you've got a full payload. Because again, these trucks are very different than a passenger vehicle in the sense that if you I'll take a school bus for an example, an empty school bus versus a full school bus could be a difference of 6,000 pounds. So it's like another car. So it's very important to understand payload, and it's very important to understand temperature. So the other one, I just saw a question about GeoTap. We integrate with GeoTap. So for our fleet customers who leverage GeoTap, we have a full software development integration with GeoTap to allow a customer to use our data on a GeoTap portal and vice versa. So.
Thank you so much, and appreciate you answering that on the fly. That was going to be my follow-up. All right, so this one, I think Owen and Gabrielle, I like both your thoughts on this because you come at it from two different perspectives, both equally valuable. Do you see a role for fuel cell EV trucking up to and including Class 8s? And I don't mind which one if he wants to go first.
Okay, I'll jump in. So when we opened up our phase 1 and phase 2 supports for medium and heavy duty vehicles, we did include fuel cell. We didn't get any proposals that included fuel cells, and we have not seen any real interest in any practical technology that includes fuel cells. If we go back 5 years, then as was common throughout Canada, we included fuel cells alongside battery electric technology. But the practicalities of battery electric technology have been proven out quite well. The same can't really be said for fuel cell. We don't have any supply of low carbon hydrogen. I haven't seen any jurisdictions in Canada that do have a supply of low carbon hydrogen. So yeah, the short answer is we haven't seen anything to suggest that there's any future for fuel cells in medium and heavy duty vehicles in the Yukon, or light duty vehicles for that matter.
Yeah, I just want to add, I think we heard a few use cases of hydrogen as used as backup systems as well, like so for remote or rural areas, like that is something that is being explored. But the biggest constraint, as always, is cost and supply around the how we can basically allow this at scale. And that is essentially the same question we're facing with like today here, like with fleet electrification, with battery electric vehicles today. So I think that is like for long haul trucking, there will be one thing that needs to happen alongside the electrification, but it's yet not there for a few, for a few use cases, I think, but it's in the roadmap for the future to support electrification as well.
Great, thank you. And Gabriella, while I'm staring at you, what are another audience question is, and I love this because it's very simple, it's very like news you can use. What are the first 5 steps in starting to transition to an EV fleet?
Oh, excellent question. I think it's the question we try to answer every day, like for customers. So I think it's yes, like first and foremost, like you started planning, like you started thinking about it. Great, thinking about the vehicle. I think as some other people said here already, think about your operational duty cycles, your payload, deciding which vehicle is going to be important, like for you to replace your ICE vehicles. That's one key aspect. Another aspect is really, after that, understanding that today you go to a fuel station to fuel your vehicles, but now you're building almost a fuel station at your home, or your depot. So thinking about your facility, how your facility managers and how your operations team is actually working on depots, it's going to be the really key aspect. So understanding what power capacity you actually have, and I saw some questions about load management. I'll get there in a second. Understanding what you actually have power available, where you're going to be charging, how you would like to incorporate your operations every day. I think that is going to be really important. Is it going to be at the docks? Is it going to be like pedestal mounted outside? understanding what actual power you have available, understanding this will allow us to come to you and say, okay, now we have the perfect solution that's going to fulfill your operational requirements on the vehicle side and your facility power constraints. And I think one excellent ally in this process is really load management. A few customers in a few interactions we had was they're purchasing the chargers and they're not coming with any software. So like basically backup charging, like as we're speaking. But now they're understanding that the data and the load management, the software layer on the chargers are not only like for reporting and monitoring, but they are also an ally to optimize and scale your charging operations today. So we are making the use of a CSMS system, so charging system management softwares. We are using also energy management systems that will allow them to automatically do building management and charging management, so that essentially they can do it, they don't need to change, fleet managers don't need to change completely their operations. They can actually use their, like the controllers, like or automated systems to do this regulation for them. So those are approaches we're doing under the power level that you can find at depots. But of course, like, if the capacity you have on site is still not enough, like it's starting earlier, the planning with the utilities and with the cities to see how can we get additional power for your facility so that you can start rolling out this plan. So those are, I think, going along, just in summary, deciding which vehicle, the duty cycle, deciding what the chargers and the charging station, deciding how it's going to be your electrification plan at your depot, are key aspects that we need to understand, and how those things will communicate together as well.
Thank you so much. I think it's a question that everyone has, and people feel like it's like almost too basic to ask, and it's not. It's a great question. So thank you to the audience member who submitted that. And then I wanted to quickly grab one more question, Yukon related, and then unfortunately we will be out of time. But the question is the Yukon provincial government considering introducing low carbon fuel standard programs for EVs, like how BC did, for example, which will ultimately provide incentives for uptake in the territory? Oh, sorry, you're still on mute.
Sorry. Yeah, I can't speak specifically to that. There's another department working on this type of thing, but I can say that within a document called Our Clean Future, which was put out in 2019, which kind of guides our initiatives in reducing greenhouse gas emissions throughout all the economy, but it's got a section on transport, and a couple of the actions are related to that. So one is a target that we require diesel fuel by 2025 of being around 20% biodiesel and renewable diesel. And another will be that by 2025, we will require around 10% of all gasoline to be ethanol by volume. So that I think that's relevant, but I don't have a specific answer to the question, unfortunately.
That's okay. Thanks so much. Really appreciate everybody on the panel contributing their time and thoughts to this. Gabriela and Simon, thank you for answering the question about load management on the fly. Simon's also put a written answer in, I believe it is in the chat. Anyway, I will pass back to Nino now, who has some news about initiatives that Electric Autonomy is doing that relate to quite a few of the topics canvassed today. Thank you again to our panelists and to the audience for being so engaged.
Well, and a big thank you to you, Emma, for moderating, and just a thank you to Tim, Gabriela, Simon, and Owen. Once again, the audience put you through your paces, and it's just incredible the amount of technology that's being developed and deployed, and the number of issues that fleet operators just really need to come to terms with as they enter into this space. So thanks for bringing your expertise to the table and really sharing it with a broad audience. So thank you for that. Just before I make those event announcements, I also want to thank once again our sponsor, ABB, for sponsoring this panel and helping to make it possible. So thank you to ABB. And yeah, in terms of those events, obviously we've been talking about fleets and really introducing fleets and charging infrastructure to your operations. but you're also going to want to think about maintenance for those vehicles and that charging infrastructure. So as part of our recurring work on EV Fleets Pro, we are running a webinar next week in partnership with ABB and Salin Tyre to dive directly into that issue. So from chargers to fluids to batteries, there's a lot to think about that is different to your traditional combustion operations cycle. So you can register for that. There is a link just dropped into the chat that you can click on and register directly there. And also we have next week, the fifth and final part of our EV charging infrastructure series, which is focused on boosting uptake in Indigenous and remote communities. This is obviously an absolute priority topic for many, and an issue that we need to address as an industry overall. And we're delighted to be welcoming the Parliamentary Secretary, Julie de Brusen, who'll be joining us to speak on that panel. The link to register for that is in the chat window as well, so you can click right on that and register to attend. So thanks once again to today's panel, and we're looking forward to see you all next week.